Hello, my friends. Every day, the situation on the front continues to seriously deteriorate, and today we'll start right away with Kostyantynivka. As of now, the Chasiv Yar and Toretsk directions can essentially be combined into one. As you can see on the map, a clear partial encirclement of Kostyantynivka has already formed. After yesterday's breakthrough, the Russians have gotten dangerously close to Alexandru Shultine and Katerynivka, so it's now a matter of just a few days before the Ukrainian forces will have to retreat further because they're practically surrounded in Sherbinivka, Novospassky, and Katerynivka. In Yablonivka, it's likely that the armed forces will still try to hold the line, since this is essentially the last defensive position before the direct road to Kostyantynivka. Today, the Russians continue assaulting Pretechene and are pushing toward Bila Hora. They're also storming Delievka, Sherbinivka, and Yablonivka, continuing to press from all directions. For now, they advancing from the south, while the situation around Chasiv Yar remains stable. At the same time, due to their gains near Rusin Yar, the Russians may soon begin moving through the fields toward Mykolaipille. They essentially enter an open terrain here, and since there are no settlements in that area, the front could start moving very quickly in their favor. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are also advancing closer to the village of Koptive. They've practically taken full control of Novopavlivka and Malynivka and breaking through toward Novoekonomichne and storming Myrolubivka, also the village of Promень, Lysiivka, and are pushing to the outskirts of Pokrovsk. There are battles ongoing for Udachne and Novosergeyevka. Clearly, the situation here is also beginning to seriously deteriorate. The Russians have started maneuvering for encirclement, but the Ukrainian forces are doing everything they can to stop them. In the Novopavlivka direction, the situation is catastrophic. Here, the Russians have managed to advance along nearly the entire front line. It's already confirmed that the village of Dachne they've come dangerously close to the Dnipropetrovsk region. Even in official reports, Ukraine's general staff now states that the Russians are launching assaults in the direction of the village of Zaporizhzhia. That indicates major problems on this section of the front. Today, the Russians are also pushing toward the village of Voskresenka and storming Zeleний Kut, Oleksiivka, and Горіхове. Unfortunately, Oleksiivka is already under Russian control. This was reported last night by Ukrainian soldiers, and sadly, the situation there is catastrophic. Troops are having to retreat rapidly, and not all of them are able to make it out. According to Ukrainian soldiers, the Russians are not taking prisoners in this area. It's complete hell in Oleksiivka. If you knew what happened there, you'd have stopped expecting anything good from this war a long time ago. I managed to get in touch with some guys. They say they barely got out, and even then, not everyone did. There are still some of our soldiers in the village, but sadly, there is only one way out. According to reports, the Russians are not taking prisoners here. That's why it was crucial for them to take this village and leave no one behind. The village of Oleksiivka is now fully under Russian control. I won't even talk about their wrecks and so-called stabilization measures. My heart breaks for our guys. Right now, the Russians are moving toward the outskirts of the next village, Zelený Kut. Fighting continues for the industrial zone to the east. As you can see, the front is moving rapidly, village by village. There are no longer battles for every meter or month-long fights over a single village. Now the advance is happening very quickly. And unfortunately, a push into the Dnipropetrovsk region is now inevitable since the Russians have officially stated that they need this area to create a buffer zone. Accordingly, offensive operations here are ongoing, and the entry into Dnipropetrovsk region is only a matter of time. The Russians have overwhelming superiority in this area, and clearly stopping them at this point is not possible. In the direction of Gulay Pole, the Russians have also intensified the activity. They continue to assault Malinivka and are heavily shelling the entire frontline area. So far, they haven't managed to advance further, but the gray zone near Malinivka has expanded somewhat, so we'll have to see how things develop. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are advancing toward Novoandriivka and are also storming Pavlivka. They are forcibly driving a wedge into our defenses, showing no fear of potential counterattacks by the Ukrainian forces. It seems they have so many reserves that they are confident this operation will succeed. As a result, the entire frontline area is under intense Russian artillery fire and constant strikes from FPV drones. The situation is extremely difficult. However, over the past 24 hours, there have been no new territorial gains. The fighting continues. In the Kherson direction, the Russians are continuing the assaults on the islands and are also shelling the right bank of the Dnipro River, but so far they haven't managed to break through further, and the situation has remained unchanged over the past day. Now let's move to the Siversk direction. Here, the Russians continue the attacks in the area of Vyemka. They are also pushing near Verkhnyo-Kamensk with ongoing battles for Grigorivka, and they are advancing into the Serebryanka forest. As you can see, Russian activity remains high, and the number of shelling in this area is also very intense. In addition, the Russians have destroyed yet another bridge in Siversk to disrupt the Ukrainian forces' logistics. A video of the strike was shared yesterday. Exclusive footage from scouts of the Southern Group, another Ukrainian mined bridge destroyed near Siversk. The Ukrainians thought it was clever and would blow up the bridges during their retreat, but in the end, our scouts cut off the Ukrainian armed forces supply and withdrawal routes. As a result, it's now more difficult for the Ukrainian military to move closer to the front and maintain defensive positions there. However, for now, Russian forces haven't managed to advance further along the front line. At least there have been no changes in the past 24 hours. In the Lyman direction, the Russians continue attacks near Yampolivka and are storming Zelena Dolina, Kharkivka, Novy Mir, and Druzhelyubivka. The situation here is very difficult as the Russians are managing to push forward. Still, over the past day, there have been no new territorial gains and the front line remains unchanged. In the Borova direction, the Russians are assaulting Boguslavka and breaking through toward Chernyshina. However, activity remains minimal here so far, and there have been no changes over the past day. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians continue attacks near Stepova Novoselivka. They are also assaulting Glushkivka and shelling Kupiansk. Still, there are no changes along the front line. In the Dvorichna area, the situation has stabilized for now. The Russians are not launching new attacks. Previous ones have been successfully repelled, and the front line remains unchanged. In the Kharkiv direction, shelling of Kharkiv and other frontline settlements continue. However, no new offensive actions have been reported so far. And in Vovchansk, attacks have also stopped, with no changes to the front line over the past day. In the Sumy direction, activity remains high, up to 30 assaults per day. The Russians continue trying to advance toward the villages of Khotyn and Malakorchakivka, and they assault in Yablonivka and Yunakivka. The Russians are already claiming new successes there and say they are gradually making progress in the villages, but for now we'll wait for official information from the Ukrainian side. In any case, the situation remains very difficult here, and the Russians are slowly moving toward the city of Sumy. In the area around the village of Tetkina, the Ukrainian forces continue offensive actions and have achieved some small gains. These claims come from Russian sources. The Ukrainian side hasn't commented on the situation. So far, there have been no significant advances by the Ukrainian forces here. Tetkina remains under Russian control, with only some surrounding positions being captured. Meanwhile, the NATO Secretary General openly said that they don't want the war in Ukraine to stop right now because Russia needs to be worn down through the war in Ukraine. The NATO Secretary General stated that a ceasefire in Ukraine poses risks for the alliance, since Putin would be able to increase his weapons stockpile and launch an attack. Recently, the head of German intelligence also said it would be safer for Europe if the war in Ukraine lasted another 5 years. A similar statement was made by Denmark's Prime Minister Frederiksen. As you can see, NATO countries are basically hiding behind Ukraine, yet they still haven't properly helped to resist the Russians. Friends, be sure to share your opinion in the comments. At the same time, Medinsky claimed that supposedly Europe is preventing Ukraine from agreeing to Russia's terms.
When you talk to them, members of the Ukrainian delegation, not on camera, unofficially, they are basically reasonable people. They also want to somehow stop the bloodshed. But the problem, as it seems to me, is that Europe, that is, the current shareholders, those who consider themselves the owners of Ukraine, simply don't allow it. They don't allow Ukraine's management to reach an agreement that would be beneficial to Ukraine. The problem is that the previous head of Ukraine's delegation, by the way, a smart guy, very intelligent and flexible, a good negotiator, once told me, "It's easy for you, Vladimir. You have one boss, but I have three." Merkel, Macron, Starmer. Single quotes. Well, those were different names back in 2022.
He also added that he saw people in the Ukrainian delegation who don't want the war to continue. I feel that they, the Ukrainian side, deep down are better than they want to appear. They even want to say something, but they can't. I saw it firsthand. 2/3 of their delegation are in military uniform. These are military personnel. I look them in the eyes. First of all, they are no different from the Russians. They're exactly the same. I see in their eyes a reluctance to fight. They don't want to fight and don't want to send their soldiers to die. It's strange because Zelensky and others say every day that Ukraine doesn't want war and didn't start it. The invasion of Ukrainian territory was carried out and continues to be carried out by the Russian army. And Sybiha said that the Russians are not constructive and only issue ultimatums in negotiations.
Ukraine desires peace more than anyone else in the world, but only Russia is blocking the peace process. The Russians have still not responded to our constructive proposals, which we sent directly before the meeting in Istanbul. Instead, they threw a list of ultimatums on the table in Istanbul that are unsuitable for diplomacy. This once again shows that pressure on Russia and everyone helping it wage this war must be increased.
And Mark Rutte stated that Russia will attack NATO countries in 5 years.
Russia has teamed up with China, North Korea, and Iran. They are expanding their militaries and their capabilities. Putin's war machine is speeding up, not slowing down. Russia is reconstituting its forces with Chinese technology and producing more weapons faster than we thought. In terms of ammunition, Russia produces in 3 months what the whole of NATO produces in a year. And its defense industrial base is expected to roll out 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 Iskander missiles this year alone. Russia could be ready to use military force against NATO within 5 years. 5 years. Let's not kid ourselves. We are all on the eastern flank now. The new generation of Russian missiles travel at many times the speed of sound. The distance between European capitals is only a matter of minutes. There is no longer East or West. There is just NATO.
Meanwhile, Medinsky claims that the Russians allegedly demand that the Kremlin destroy Ukraine with Oreshnik.
Indeed, our population, our citizens, demand much tougher actions from us. It was very hard for us to go to the second round of negotiations when Ukraine deliberately blew up a passenger train on the day of our departure, killing civilians and children. You see, sometimes when a missile hits a military target, the electronic warfare systems activate to divert it, and the missile explodes, hitting a neighboring house. That is part of war. It's a tragedy. Sometimes when a missile is shot down, debris falls on residential buildings and people die. That also happens. It's terrible, but it's part of war. But when it's a passenger train, I think a two-story one visible from afar, a huge passenger train, and someone manually blows up the railway and highway, seeing the train, and presses the button. The button was pressed manually. That is terrorism. That's not a train carrying tanks. Not even a fuel train. It's clearly a passenger train. And it kills civilians, deliberately, on peaceful territory. Of course, after that, citizens demand, we need a nutcracker. Strike Kiev, strike Lviv, enough negotiations. And it is very difficult for us in this regard.
And how many civilians have the Russians killed in Ukraine is already hard to count. As you can see, they keep blaming Ukraine for everything. Friends, be sure to share your opinion in the comments. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.